The story begins with a conversation between an unknown young man and a girl named Ophelia, who was sitting on a throne. The young man promised that the girl would be punished for her actions against the royal authority. Armed archers were already aiming at Ophelia. She does not pay attention to the young man's words. On the contrary, she promises to destroy everything around her because she is not afraid of anything, and punishment will remain just empty words for her. The girl's audacity impresses everyone present. Ophelia woke up in her room. She had a terrible dream in which soldiers and palace guards shot arrows and crossbows at her. The places where the projectiles hit hurt in reality, as if it were real. A maid entered the room. She brought tea for her mistress, but when she saw her lying on the floor, she realized that she had come at the wrong time. Ophelia, meanwhile, realized that she had returned to the past. This had happened about 4 times in a row before. She was tired of it. The repetition of these terrible events caused her incredible emotional pain and made her suffer. She wanted it to end. The girl actually got the role of the final boss in an adult novel called The Return of the Crown Prince. According to the plot, Ophelia imprisoned Prince Utah in a tower and brutally murdered his mother. The novel ends with the prince defeating all his enemies and taking the throne of the emperor, to which he had every moral right. The villainess, of course, is punished and dies publicly. But after that, Ophelia decides to change her fate every time it repeats itself. The first time she treated her brother very well, whom she had locked up in the tower, but then she released him and put him on the throne. Instead, she spent the rest of her life with her lawful husband, Kirsten Kallman. He was the next owner of the magic tower and a very physically attractive man. However, this character turned out to be capable of a very mean and insidious act. He said that his wife Ophelia should take the throne. Kirsten personally took care of everything. The young man craved power. The girl did not want this. She did not understand what was going on. After all, she had voluntarily renounced her right and claim to the throne. Her life had been true and honest, so she did not want to change it now. Ophelia's refusal led her husband to hand her over to the emperor's spies, and she was sentenced to death by beheading. But this time she also managed to survive and wake up. The girl was very angry because she had tried with all her might to bring about a happy ending, but instead her plans were ruined by Kastani, and she was forced to live the life she had hoped to escape. Ophelia never thought that the traitor who would lead her to the guillotine would be her husband, a minor character who had never attracted any attention. She believed that Kirsten should be punished. The terrible thought that she would return every time she went against the plotline frightened the girl. If this continued, she would live through the tragic ending over and over again. Ophelia realized that in order to avoid death, she had to follow the plotline. Otherwise, she would not escape death and would find herself in a closed loop from which there would be no escape until the end of time. After all, this was already her 5th life, and every time she suffered because of her bad character. Everything around her continued to repeat itself and constantly changed according to the script. Even if she hadn't suffered in her past lives, the result would have been the same. Prince Ut personally carried her mutilated body out in front of everyone so that they could all see his power and right to rule. Ophelia realized that she could not escape her fate. And despite her heroine's nasty character, she was forced to ensure a painless end to her life in the circumstances that the plot had created for her. She was tired of dying from a volley of arrows. The princess wanted to die peacefully, and to do that, she had to do what had to be done, letting fate decide the twists and turns of her life. Ophelia realized that the easiest way to do this would be to simply hand over the crown to the young Ut and distance herself from affairs and live a normal life, as far as possible. The girl wanted only a peaceful death, which would be more like falling asleep. Therefore, there was nothing left to worry about. She had already decided everything for herself. However, she wondered how to do this in practice without being reborn. Ophelia realized that she needed to be reborn at the moment when Sitar was alive. That was the name of the girl who was a servant to the emperor. Sitar came from the northern lands and tried not to reveal this. The emperor fell so deeply in love with her that they had a son. He was named Utik, and now he was the legitimate ruler of the state. The transmigrant had to return at the moment of Sitar's death. The servants saw that their mistress was unhappy. The girls openly asked what they had done wrong and feared cruel punishment from their mistress, who was capable of anything for the slightest offence. Ophelia wanted to return to the very beginning of the coming-of-age novel, but she had to learn to live in the circumstances that had befallen her. In any case, it was not worth living the life of a thief and a wicked sorceress. After breakfast, Ophelia asked the maid how long the boy had been in the dungeon. The girl replied that today marked exactly 1 year since his imprisonment in the dungeons of the ruler's palace. A brilliant plan on how to die quickly was born in the girl's mind in a flash. She believed that she would die quickly when she entered Kirsten's cell, and he would simply kill her with his own hands. She certainly wasn't going to worry about the boy's fate, because as the main character, he simply couldn't die. He had spent the last year in a prison located in a magical tower, luxurious only on the outside, but who knows what it was like inside. But even in such conditions, he managed not to catch any diseases, and no doctor or healer was ever called to him. So Yuti's fate would be protected by an invisible force that regulated everything around him. In the palace, Prince Yut, the only son of the King Emperor and his legitimate heir, looked out the window of his cell. The maid was worried about him, but he said that he was fine, just thinking about his fate. The boy added that he would like to leave this room now and just walk down the street in the city under the wonderful sun on such a fine day. The woman was surprised to see the boy so kind and sensitive. She reminded him once again of the person who had locked him in the tower. But he seemed indifferent. The maid repeatedly appealed to him, saying that his mother, Sithara, had also suffered at the hands of Ophelia, his half-sister. The girl had just arrived at the door of Yuta's cell, accompanied by her maids. At that moment, the prince asked the nanny not to say such things about the princess, because someone could report them, and their stay here would become unbearable. At that moment, Ophelia entered the room. Shana promised that the emperor would save them. But the princess said that this was very presumptuous. His Highness was not feeling well. He was weak and too old for this. The maid stood between the princess and her stepbrother and spread her arms wide. The woman asked why Ophelia had come to see them, since she had promised not to harm the boy while he was in the tower. The girl asked her to be quiet, otherwise she would simply destroy the maid. She herself felt uncomfortable that she had adopted Ophelia's mannerisms and even began to speak like a thief. Such a transformation would not go unnoticed by others. The boy asked Shana to listen to the girl, because if his maid and nanny died, he would have no one to rely on in this life. Ophelia, meanwhile, reminded him how he had loved his sister in his past life and cared for her. But everything changed over the years. After becoming emperor, Yuti ordered her to be killed in front of his subjects. So his brother's love could have been just a sham, behind which he hid his true nature in order to gain power. The girl sat down next to the boy and asked him in a trusting tone if he wanted to get out of prison. The boy asked the princess if she had heard him correctly. He asked if she was going to kill him and get rid of Shana. She asked why he thought that. He replied that she would not do such a thing without a reason. The most likely option was that the princess would send him to the battlefield or into exile, which was not much different. The girl realized that Yuti had gathered all his willpower in his fist, and although he was trembling with fear, he wanted very much to stay alive and save his nanny. The woman also did not really believe Ophelia's proposal. The princess said that due to illness and old age, their father, the emperor, had become weak in mind and would soon have to give up his power to someone else. He would soon meet with Sitara, and only Ophelia could release Yuti. The princess leaned toward the boy and asked him to think carefully and concentrate, because she was his only hope at that moment. No one else would dare to defend him. Finally, the boy understood what was going on, and Ophelia saw in his eyes the sparkle she had seen in her past life, which had led her to her death by guillotine. After her first rebirth, Ophelia thought a lot. She came to the conclusion that the blame for her death lay not only with her and Kirstein. She remembered her conversation with Sitara. At that time, Ophelia had been harsh with her, reminding her that the emperor no longer had any feelings for her. The girl said that she would rule and no one else, and she would pave her way to power over the corpses of her enemies, so everyone who stood in her way would be destroyed and tortured in the tower. The woman begged for mercy. She promised that she would not claim anything. Her fate and the fate of her child were entirely in Ophelia's hands. So if Sitar was to die, she begged for mercy for her son Yuta and his nanny. Ophelia hesitated for a long time. After a few minutes of thought, she offered her hand to Sitar for a kiss, then reminded her that she would have to answer for her words. That very night, Sitar was to take poison and die. In the morning, a messenger arrived at Ophelia's chambers, where she was being combed by her servants. He brought terrible news that the queen and the emperor's wife had died of poisoning. The princess smiled and said that it was a tragic end. That same day, Ophelia's scary and creepy soldier took the little boy and his nanny to a magical tower, where they were both to serve their punishment. None of them hoped to ever leave the walls of their unexpected prison. Ophelia reminded him of her old offer of friendship. He had not believed her then, but now she was ready to offer it again. Ophelia promised not to harm him, so the choice was entirely up to the boy. Ophelia said that now the only question was what the boy would decide for himself. Either he would gather his strength, trust her, and go with her to freedom, or he could stay there and continue to be afraid and suffer. One of the maids accompanying the girl said that the poor Prince Yuti was so frightened and terrified that he would remain in that room for the rest of his life. No one expected the boy to be released. Suddenly, he jumped out of his room and grabbed Ophelia by the hand. He said he didn't want to stay in this place anymore. He promised that he would always be with Milady and would not try to take revenge on her. Ute added that he did not know what the princess was really thinking or what was on her mind, but he was ready to trust her and follow her. But under no circumstances would he remain locked up in this place for many years. The girl praised the boy. She said that he was behaving as a true hero should. Finally, Ute overcame his fear and went out into freedom. He had defeated himself in the end. The maid was still trying to convince her young master that it was dangerous to go out, but the boy replied that being in this tower did not mean being safe and not to worry. Youth turned away from the maid, who was still on the floor. He added that he had made his final decision and did not want to stay in this place a minute longer. The woman could either go with him or be free. Ophelia took matters into her own hands. She called the boy a dirty cat who needed to be bathed and gave the maid the appropriate order. The princess also added that they did not trust each other, but that this was considered normal for now. The young man is getting ready in front of the mirror. The butler asks him where he is going. The boy does not give a specific answer. He is convinced that the servants should not know everything about him. Finally, the man asks him to take care of himself. The maids bathed Utah. It was unusual for the boy to undergo such procedures in a huge bathtub. The servants bustled around him, trying to help and please their young master as much as possible. His headmaid brought clothes for her master, but he was already dressed in what Ophelia had prepared for him. The woman did not like this outfit. She asked them to stop and not to mock the boy. Finally, the preparations were complete, and everyone was amazed at the changes that had taken place in the boy. He himself said that he finally considered himself clean and neat, as befitted his status. The only thing that worried him was Ophelia's absence. Ute wanted to take a walk in the garden. After a long stay in a closed room where his only contact with the outside world was through a window, the boy was amazed by the beauty of the surrounding area. He couldn't relax because danger was constantly lurking. The boy had to prepare himself mentally for death and see the world for perhaps the last time before his end. He didn't want to part with life. His maid added fuel to the fire. She constantly insisted that Lady Ophelia could not be trusted. She deliberately let the prince out of the tower so that she could play a cruel joke on him. The girl's behavior did not arouse suspicion. She behaved quite normally and even called Utah to the table to have breakfast together. The maid was against this, but the boy was curious to see how things would unfold. As he slowly walked towards the girl, Ophelia's maid spilled tea on her dress. The girl was frightened by her mistress's anger. She had seen something like this before, and it scared her. But the aristocrat assured her that it was normal. Ute sat down at the table opposite the girl. Her reaction to the spilled tea today threw him off balance. He had expected a completely different reaction from her, as had often been the case in the past. The girl decided to start the conversation first. She said that when their relationship became more relaxed and less tense, they would be able to have breakfast and eat together like this all the time. At the same time, the boy would learn everything a future prince needed to know. The girl servants overheard the words about the prince. Previously, they could not even imagine such a thing, but now their mistress was convincing Yuti that he was destined to be a prince. The world was turned upside down. Meanwhile, the girl continued to list the things that the future prince would have to learn. Thus, a very serious and painstaking task awaited him in the future. Yuti was confused. Ophelia added that, in addition to everything else, she would also enroll him in fencing lessons. The boy did not like this. He suspected that this was a way to kill him and get rid of him. The girl smiled and assured him that when Yuti thought about something, his aristocratic origins were immediately apparent. But the boy was now confused by his inability to use cutlery. He said that when he tried to use a knife and fork, he just banged them loudly on the dishes, and the result was 0. Ophelia assured him that soon he would be taught by true masters of their craft. The girl added that the boy would live in the Rose Palace, where Sitar had previously lived. He would need maids for this, and she was ready to provide them, so she wanted to know approximately how many girls would be needed. Ute replied that he only needed Shana. Ophelia asked if one woman could manage such a large palace on her own. A maid who approached Ophelia informed her that Lord Eckhard had arrived and was waiting to see her. The conversation was interrupted by the girl feeling unwell. She suddenly dropped the cutlery from her hands and bent over as if she were about to vomit. Ophelia asked for the boy to be taken away and brought to her room. The girl was confused by the appearance of the character she had married in her past life. At that time, it seemed to both of them that they were simply made for each other and that their love would burn forever, overcoming all adversity. But the betrayal he had planned behind her back still haunted her, even now. So Ophelia would have preferred that they never saw each other again in this life. She didn't like Kirsten, but she couldn't just avoid him. Ute approached Ophelia and offered her his cutlery. He said he hardly ever used it. It would be more useful to Ophelia, as he was happy to eat with his hands. A moment later, he wondered why he had done that. It was scary to admit that he had developed feelings for this girl. He also thought that Ophelia seemed confused after hearing about the guest. The boy decided to ask the princess who the guest was that the maid had mentioned. Ophelia did not want to tell the boy everything. She was more interested in why he had decided to visit her first thing in the morning. The maid informed the guest that the young lady was ill and not ready to receive anyone. He replied that in that case, he would leave the palace. But at the same time, he asked if he had done something wrong that Ophelia did not want to see him. Meanwhile, Ut asked who the uninvited guest was. He did not want to eavesdrop, but the girl announced his arrival loudly. The prince asked if Lord Eckhart was a bad man and if he dared to threaten Ophelia. Ophelia replied that she simply did not expect a guest at such an hour. However, the girl turned pale, and it was clear that she was lying. Finally, she said that she was just a little afraid of the Lord because he was a great magician. Uther became curious. He had never seen a real magician before. At the moment, the Lord was also the owner and head of the magic tower. He had been appointed after the mysterious disappearance of his predecessor. But that wasn't what made Kirsten great. He possessed unlimited magical power, unmatched by any wizard on the continent. In their age, when magic was disappearing, Kirsten had become a unique and extraordinary personality. Ophelia thought that perhaps she had said too much about Kirsten. If something terrible happened to the prince, he might suspect her and Kirsten of conspiracy and have them punished by guillotine. The boy asked why such a powerful magician had decided to visit Ophelia. He had no intention of defaming her beauty, but he had only read about wizards in books on the history of the empire, and there was nothing like that there. He realized he had said too much. The princess did not allow him to read books and tried in every way to reduce his contact with reality and the outside world. Shana probably brought him books. The boy was worried that Shana would be punished because of him. But Ophelia suggested that he go to the emperor instead. In the meantime, the boy could walk around the palace and explore its nooks and crannies. Youth was curious to know what Ophelia herself thought about it, so that he could prepare himself for what would happen next. The boy said he was very ashamed. The girl asked if he was ashamed of revealing her secret. The maids and Youth breathed a sigh of relief when Ophelia silently went about her business. At that moment, the boy believed that he was a hair's breadth away from death and destruction. Fortunately, Shana was not hurt at all. Ophelia herself thought that the constant stress and tension would not allow her to live for long. She had to constantly choose her words carefully to describe the situation in more detail and not cause anyone's dissatisfaction. A maid caught up with her in the hallway. The girl gave her mistress a teddy bear. It had been sent by the emperor himself, but he had fallen ill and sent Lord Kirsten as his messenger. Ophelia was surprised. The toy was huge. It must have been enchanted. The maid added that the lord himself had promised to visit the young mistress later, as he thought she was ill. Ophelia said she did not wish to see him. It was the maid's duty to ensure that no uninvited guests were allowed into her room. Kirsten's desires did not interest or concern her in the least. The maid finally asked what she should say to Lord Kirsten. Ophelia replied that he could send the distinguished gentleman away. She had no intention of receiving the uninvited guest. He was definitely unpleasant and unwelcome to her. And now, before visiting His Highness the Emperor, she had to change her outfit every time. When Ophelia became empress, she would definitely change her attitude toward luxury and unnecessary expenses due to the vanity of others. When the girl entered the emperor's room, she noticed that he was asleep. Ophelia decided to quietly slip past and leave the documents. But His Highness was a light sleeper and immediately sensed someone's presence. The man leaned on his cane and peered out from his bed. He was the father of Ophelia and Yeut. The ruler asked for the door to be closed so he could talk to her alone. The man understood perfectly well who was causing the turmoil in the palace. The emperor said that he would very much like Yeut to be his heir and no one else. The father asked who the girl took after. She replied that she had grown up with him and her sick mother. The emperor called her a bad girl. Ophelia knew that now he would pour water on her again, as he had often done in the past. Even the fact that his daughter had freed Yeut played no role. This time, Ophelia did not want to stand wet again or trudge to her room in wet clothes, so the girl quickly dodged the glass of water. Her father was angry with her for such mockery. The man insisted that killing his own brother was a very grave sin, for which he would sooner or later have to answer. Meanwhile, the girl replied that her father himself had quickly forgotten about Sitaru in his time. Ophelia drew some water and sat down next to her father. She advised him to remain calm and conserve what little strength he had left. After all, he had always given the impression of being a strong warrior and a powerful ruler. The daughter reassured the emperor, telling him that nothing would happen to Youth. On the contrary, she would die by his hands. The man could not believe it and asked if his daughter had gone mad. Ophelia did not want to talk to him anymore. She said that she was successfully handling government affairs, so her father could rest and not expect any treachery on her part for the sake of power and honors. The girl concluded by saying that her brother would become emperor at the age of 20, when he would be able to gain strength and control the aristocracy, who would try to rule the young prince for their own benefit. With that, their conversation was over. The servants guarding the room stepped aside to let the girl pass. Her father still demanded that she return and tell him about her plans, but his daughter no longer wished to be in his company. In the corridor, she met a woman who had taken it upon herself to care for His Highness. The daughter asked her to make every effort to find people who would look after her father and be knowledgeable about various medications. Ophelia said that she would be personally responsible to her for carrying out this order, although the girl understood perfectly well that she had no reason to love her father. Her good heart was ruining her reputation. Later, she sorted through the letters. It turned out that no one wanted to be Yeut's teacher. The aristocrats were not afraid of the boy. They were frightened by Ophelia, who would control everything and punish them for poor work. They still had no idea of the boy's true future. If one of these nobodies had agreed to work with Yeut and teach him everything a prince needed to know, they would have ensured him a comfortable life. There was no other option but for Ophelia to take on the boy's education herself for the time being. Perhaps someone would come forward later. She was most concerned about fencing, or rather finding a teacher for it. That was to be the end of their conversation. Ophelia said that she would teach him herself at first. The boy looked at her in surprise. After all, such a manner of communication was too soft for her character. Ophelia said that when he had no more questions for her, he could go to his room. She would personally inform him of the start of lessons, by letter or through the servants. The distance between them was palpable. For some reason, her sister felt sorry that UT trusted Shani more than her. After all, she was the one who had rescued him from captivity in the tower, and she was trying to teach him everything he would need to know in the future to take the throne. Exhausted, the Emperor's daughter fell asleep right at her desk. The last thing she thought about was how bad her relationship with UT would become in the future, and how much she was risking her own life. The boy walked away, accompanied by a servant, thinking about what he had seen yesterday at the entrance to the Emperor's room. Ophelia was talking to that woman, but because of the distance, he couldn't hear what they were saying. This question bothered the boy. He came to Ophelia and asked if he could ask her something. The girl thought of many questions to ask, but the boy asked why she hadn't killed him right away. Ophelia turned away and said that she was just using him. When UT became a young man, she would definitely take advantage of him. He would be forced to do something for her personally. But for now, it would remain a secret. Already in bed, Ophelia thought about the intrusive Lord Kirsten. He came again and asked for an audience with her personally. And again, the girl was forced to refuse him. Her plan had only just begun to take shape. A servant knocked on the door. She asked if her mistress would like to take a bath. The girl refused, but asked the servant to come into her room. Ophelia wanted to ask her maid a few questions. Emmy entered the room carrying a vase with a flower. This time, it was something unusual. The girl told her mistress that such a flower could only be found in the northern mountains, which is why she had brought it today. Ophelia looked closely at the flower. She knew that this flower glowed at night and had an extraordinary fragrance. Only a true warrior or aristocrat could find this plant in the wild mountains. To make matters worse, there were terrifying monsters that lived in the mountains where this flower grew. It was impossible to transport the flower from those desolate and primitive places by ordinary means of transportation. Kirsten also contributed to this. Ophelia began to get angry. Annie added to the tension by saying that Lord Eckhard had also sent a new mattress and nightgown. His attention to her was not without reason. After all, the young man did not give up despite all her refusals. Annie added that the Lord had promised to return. She did not intend to contradict her mistress's wishes, but she reminded her that the young man had bought many things and given them to Ophelia. This made the girl's head ache even more. A bad feeling had not left her since the beginning of the day. It was too early to say anything, but she was not going to sacrifice herself for Lord Kirsten's ambitions. Suddenly, the girl asked Annie if she had any peasant clothes. The princess planned to dress up as a commoner and walk through the streets of the city. The girl thought that her mistress was doing this to avoid falling into the hands of assassins or simply to hide her identity. Today, they had the opportunity to walk the streets like ordinary mortals. This gave Ophelia particular pleasure. Only here could the girl distract herself from the disturbing thoughts about what might happen to her. For some reason, the maid thought that her mistress had not simply changed her clothes and gone to the city for no reason. After all, she understood perfectly well that if she was seen here, it could mean the end for both of them. Could Ophelia have made an agreement with Kirsten? The couple moved further and further away from the city centre. Finally, they wandered into a neighbourhood that even the maid didn't know anything about. How the lady knew about it remained a mystery. The danger was growing. Suddenly, a tall young man in armour appeared in front of Ophelia. His body was covered in bloody smears. The maid's worst fears began to come true and take on increasingly bizarre forms. Annie tried to call the princess to avoid something bad happening in these ruins. However, Ophelia asked her to calm down, because only the maid's screams could attract someone to their location and lure the criminals. The lady went further and further, carefully examining every wall and every corner. The place she needed was definitely somewhere nearby. It seemed as if she was deliberately looking for someone specific. This is how she met a tall young man who was looking at her intently, trying not to show his surprise. The girl was frightened by the sight of blood on the stranger's armor, but she kept herself under control and suppressed her panic. Suddenly she tripped over the stones and broken glass lying around. There were two options. fall backward and break her head, or fall forward and land in the arms of the stranger. The young man grabbed her by her tunic. Finally, he let go of Milady, and she fell to the ground. The maid thanked him for his help, but asked who the young man was who dared to behave in such a manner toward a well-bred girl of noble birth. Ophelia asked Annie to be quiet and not spoil the situation with her whining and wailing. The young man said that the lady had done it on purpose, pursuing a specific goal. This was where slave traders conducted their business. The stranger added that the yellow notices on the wall were offers to buy slaves. So Ophelia had probably written her servant's name on one of those notices and hung it on the wall. Her fate was already sealed. The girl began to calm Annie down. She assured her that she had done nothing of what the rude man was saying. The young man looked at this scene with surprise. It had been a long time since he had encountered such aristocrats. He had already turned around and was about to leave when Ophelia stopped him and asked him to stay with her servant for 5 minutes while she finished her business. He couldn't get over this state of affairs, but he agreed. Ophelia told the servant, who began to argue, that it was dangerous to take her with him. It was just as dangerous to leave her here alone. So the knight would keep Annie company until her mistress returned. Soon the boy was standing at the door. He was alone in the dark courtyard. The young man knocked on the door and heard someone walking barefoot toward the door with small, quick steps to open it. He was greeted by a little boy. The boy was delighted because he knew that his friend would come back for him sooner or later. The little boy said that his friend smelled good. This rarely happened, but it was a very pleasant surprise. Meanwhile, Annie was glad that the stranger had left. She asked the lady to stop, but she did not listen. She replied that she had important business in this place and already regretted taking her servant with her. Ophelia was looking for the meeting place of the mercenary guild. She had travelled all this way to find a husband. His name was Now, and he was considered the best mercenary in the entire kingdom and empire. Life circumstances forced him to join the ranks of mercenary soldiers. He came from a very poor family, but his willpower and desire for a better life made him the most expensive and popular warrior. This mercenary was to play an important role in the girl's life. So now he was kneeling before her, blindfolded and beaten. Ophelia wondered where the bruises on his body came from. He asked her not to ask about it. The young man added that at the moment she was his only mistress and owner, so he was ready to carry out her orders right away. The girl liked his answer. There was no need to delay, but she resorted to trickery. Ophelia emphasized that she was this mercenary's mistress, and now she wanted to know the truth about the bruises. She was curious to know who had the nerve to do such a thing to him. Now was not known for his good or pleasant character. However, people liked him for his integrity and loyalty to unwritten rules. On the other hand, he loved his younger brother very much, which everyone knew. The girl was interested in this not just out of curiosity. He had become her soldier, so she couldn't just leave Now beaten up like that. There was no reason to torment a person so badly for no reason. The young man told her that his previous owner, whose name was Guild Jean, had chosen this punishment for him. The man did not like the fact that his soldier was being sold for more money to some aristocrat. Ophelia felt awkward. After all, he had known the truth about her from the very beginning. And now this naive boy was swearing his loyalty to her until the end, because under such conditions he had been sold to a young lady for a round sum. The girl asked why he was still kneeling before her. Was the soldier so weak that he couldn't do it? The young man easily tore the bonds on his hands, and Ophelia, according to tradition, removed the blindfold from his eyes. Ophelia bent down low to him and introduced herself. She also added that everyone around her considered her the rightful crown princess, who would soon become the sole ruler of the entire state, subjugating the aristocracy. The girl added that he should not be surprised. From that moment on, she was his mistress, and he was her bodyguard. But the young man wondered why she needed a personal bodyguard. He turned his thoughts back to Utah. He said that he refused to obey her will because he had no intention of killing a child. The girl reassured him, saying that she had no intention of killing him. She had completely different plans, and her enemy was a powerful magician. But even Lord Kirsten was not her target. He simply had to protect her and keep the insolent wizard away from the crown princess. On Ophelia's orders, now was to kill her in the easiest way possible at a certain time. The young man could not understand this. Ophelia knew that he might not agree to such a thing right away. So she said that everything had been planned and that he would not face any legal consequences. She had a good plan. The girl said that she was ready to make it look like suicide rather than murder, and she would do everything in her power to ensure that he would not be prosecuted. For the time being, a secret hiding place was prepared for Now. Ophelia was holding a large bag of gold and jewelry in her hands. She promised that after her death, all of this would belong to Now. He couldn't refuse such an offer. With this money, he and his brother would live comfortably. The girl looked intently at the young man. She didn't think he would refuse. Ophelia added that the slave contract would be annulled after that, but Now refused to do such a thing to her for all the gold in the world. Although he was a slave, he was not going to stoop so low in front of the girl and his conscience. In the original work, the mercenary hated the girl more than anyone else. Even Yu-Ti was ready to forgive her for some things. Now was Prince Yute's right-hand man and the first to betray Ophelia. That's why she was so worried when he came close. He was supposed to hate her with every fiber of his being, but that wasn't the case. The girl was very wrong. Now knelt before her and said that he would never raise a hand against his mistress. He would rather die than dare to do anything to his mistress. Ophelia did not believe him. In her past life, she had had a bitter experience with this boy. Back then, he and her brother had betrayed Ophelia and led to her terrible death. Now, the girl had to play the role of an angry ruler. She looked at the young man and asked if that wasn't enough for him. Now looked at her bitterly. He added that he would rather die by her hand than try to kill his lawful mistress. Ophelia didn't believe in such ostentatious heroism. She thought it was worth trying to manipulate him again by influencing his younger brother's life. But someone knocked on the door again, interrupting their discussion. Iyot stood behind the door with a large book in his hands. He asked for forgiveness, but his sister said that he could visit her at any time and ask her anything that interested him or was unclear. The girl realized that she needed to quickly win Now over to her side before he became friends with her brother. Then the two of them would definitely form an alliance that would be decisive for her future. She also didn't want them to be seen together. Ophelia said she hoped the boy would think about her proposal and agree to all the conditions. In fact, the mercenary's stubbornness was beginning to annoy her. To make matters worse, Yu-Ti arrived, wanting to talk. The girl couldn't let the boy into her room and see Now half naked. She asked her brother if he wanted to go with her to the fair, which was traditionally about to begin in the capital. At that moment, the confused mercenary sat over the gold scattered on the floor in front of him. He thought about the strange behavior of his new mistress. No one had ever asked him for such a favor before. Going to the festival and fair was not a simple, spontaneous idea. The girl planned to meet Now's younger brother there and get to know him. Having gained the boy's attention, Ophelia hoped to influence his brother. The boy had to earn money here by selling flowers and petty theft. After all, Now couldn't visit him all the time. His older brother was a slave to the guild, and his life was dictated by the rules of society. The time would come when Ophelia would use Now to gain complete control over his brother, the mercenary. Well, she would have to agree to the girl's request. She didn't want to take advantage of the situation. Now the girl needed to focus on her younger brother. He had spent a long time in the tower and was now very vulnerable. He liked everything around him and was simply delighted by the spectacle. Ophelia tried not to keep him on a leash, so she asked him not to mention her title in public. The girl said he could go and look around. In addition, her sister treated him to some cotton candy. The boy was alarmed that the girl was going to leave him almost alone in a crowd of people, where it was so easy to get lost and fall into the hands of people who were not very kind. Ophelia aroused suspicion again. The boy was confused by the freedom his sister had suddenly given him. He didn't know what to do. Fortunately, Shani gave him 5 shillings, and he decided to have some fun. He thought of buying his sister a bouquet of flowers. Suddenly, Yu-Ti noticed a boy his age. He was offering flowers to passers-by for a nominal price. Behind the boy stood a burly man who was ready to protect the flower seller. You'd quickly returned to Ophelia. The girl was surprised that he had found her so easily and why he had returned so early. He was holding something in his hand and smiling. He had prepared a nice surprise for his sister. Ophelia was ready to lecture him again about not calling her by her title, but the boy suddenly held out a flower to her. Ut thanked her for being so kind to him, even though many people thought otherwise. The girl began to cry. The boy didn't like seeing tears streaming down his sister's face. Ut said he wanted to cheer her up. She thanked him for the gift, because no one had ever done anything like that for her before. She added that as soon as they got home, he should sit down and study economics. Ut was surprised by his sister's sudden change of heart. She said that trading a scarf for flowers was irrational. Ut realized that the scarf had been stolen by the little boy who was selling flowers. Nayu was being helped by his mentor, the same burly man. It was the boy who could have stolen the scarf, because Ut himself did not exchange it for flowers. There was a moment when the boy approached Nayu to take a closer look at the flowers. The little thief took advantage of this to steal the item, but Ophelia was not even angry. After all, the boy had spent too long alone in the tower. The boy decided to deal with the thief and get even for his prank. He had no intention of forgiving him and remaining a victim. Ophelia realized that this way she would soon find Nayu, which was what she had hoped for. Finally, they saw the boy, who was barely standing on his feet. He looked quite ill. Ut pounced on him, demanding that he return the stolen goods. But Naya begged for help. He was clearly in pain. Behind Naya, who had fallen to the ground and was crawling, stood a burly man. It was clear that he was the boy's mentor or guardian, and that he had beaten the boy. The flower seller was injured by the thugs, real gangsters. In her past life, she had dealt with him before. He was the leader of a criminal clan and had forced Naya to steal for him. This time, the boy had probably not shared his loot with him and was being severely punished. Nayu held the scarf tightly. He had no intention of giving it to anyone because it was his only chance to save his brother, who was enslaved by a mercenary guild, and he risked his life for his younger brother. Ophelia realized that Nayu had tried to rob the thief and got caught, and now he would have to pay for it. In the world of thieves and robbers, such an act was considered treason and was severely punished according to their strange laws. Ute decided that he should stand up for the boy, but the girl stopped him. She had to act more cautiously, because a rash confrontation with this bandit could end badly for them. The boy replied that stealing was very bad, but leaving this boy to his fate would be an even worse option for them. They had to try to save the boy. Ophelia said that her brother was very kind. Ophelia called the guards. She ordered them to make sure that the burly man couldn't even walk after they explained to him that he shouldn't hurt and take advantage of little boys. Surprised, Ut asked how quickly the guards had arrived. The girl replied that she had brought them with her from the beginning, and they had followed behind in the shadows so as not to disturb their walk. It would have been risky to leave without them. Ophelia thought that with Ut's help she would quickly become close to Nayu, and they would work together on a matter that was of great interest to her. So it could be said that her plan had succeeded. Nayu fell asleep from exhaustion. Ophelia calmed her younger brother and said that he was just very tired. She wondered if Nayu was really so good and naive, or if he was just doing it for his older brother. The mercenary quickly found out about Nayu, who was in his mistress's hands. At first the soldier was angry, thinking that Ophelia herself had done him wrong, but when everything was cleared up, he swore his allegiance. The young man promised to become a faithful servant to Milady and to be loyal to her until the end of his life. In return, Ophelia said that he should simply kill her at the right moment with a single blow. The soldier replied that he would carry out any request or order she gave him. Ophelia was delighted and said that they would discuss the details later. For now, they had to leave the room so as not to disturb the child who was sleeping. Ophelia gave her new subject a special ring made of magical metal. The artifact itself had the ability to change its shape. From now on, Now would be called Sir Philip, and he would be her protector. The young man had to act thoughtfully and avoid impulsive actions. Instead, the mercenary asked if he could learn something from the mistress. He was curious why a person who had everything wanted to die at the hands of a mercenary. The girl gathered the younger children and said that from now on, Nay would live on the estate. He would be given a room in the armory, and Ut was to befriend him and establish good relations for their future benefit. But that was not the end of their reception. Ophelia introduced them to their new guard. His name was Sir Philip, and he would be responsible for their safety. The spell worked perfectly. No one would even recognize now in this guise. Meanwhile, UT looked closely at Philip and wondered how he could protect them, since he himself was barely standing up in the wind. But the young man actually had an unknown aura about him in which one could discern determination and force. At that moment, Ophelia stopped the guard. She informed him that he was not a slave, but a simple servant, so there was no need to swear allegiance. The prince would simply be his next client, who would pay generously for his protection. Philip stood before the young men and expressed his gratitude for such an honorable task. He turned to Naya and Utah with a proposal to spend some time in an interesting way while the princess was busy with state affairs. The girl thought about how the fair was over. Winter was coming soon, after which the emperor would die, and the events of the main plot would come to life. The future in which she would die could not be changed. But this time, her death would not be as terrible as it had been before. Philip had to resolve this issue very quickly and almost painlessly. After all, he was renowned as a professional in his field. The older brother was concerned only with the life and conditions of his younger brother. He promised that he would destroy anyone who tried to harm Naya. The princess replied that it sounded very appealing to her. He asked her not to joke and to take his words seriously this time. The mercenary's reaction was instantaneous. He grabbed the girl and shielded her from danger. Ophelia did not even understand what had happened to her. But the threat was imaginary. There were just a bunch of rabbits running around. They appeared from a smoke screen. The girl could only guess whose work it was. Only one man in her circle could have cast such a spell. The maid reported that in the princess's absence, Lord Kirsten had come to the palace and cast a spell on it. More precisely, he had cast a spell on the garden surrounding the estate. The sorcerer had mentioned an unusual surprise for Ophelia. The mercenary did not want to see this as a peaceful gesture. He insisted that something could be hidden among the rabbits that would only harm their common cause, and he was determined. The young man's words were true. If he didn't explain to the Lord that this was not the way to behave, he would continue to make such foolish visits and interfere with their normal life. So she had no intention of stopping him. With his actions, Kirsten could only attract unwanted attention to her and give rise to gossip about the relationship between them. And she didn't want that, because Ophelia was trying to live a quiet, peaceful life. The sorcerer's motives bothered her. She went to his estate with her maid. The girl found this strange, because the mistress had tried so many times to avoid the company of this young man and not meet him. Kerr watched the guest from the window. He quickly gave orders for the reception to be prepared. The girl would have to wait a little while he got himself ready. The main thing was that she interpreted it correctly. Ophelia sat in the hall and waited for the master of the estate. She felt uneasy for some reason because she had come alone and now had to wait for him. This way he could try to humiliate her in return. Finally, the master himself rushed into the room. He asked her to forgive him for being late. The girl tried to treat him without prejudice, ignoring her previous experience with the young man. Now he did not make the unpleasant impression that the girl remembered from her past life. Perhaps this time he was skillfully hiding his true intentions and disguising himself in front of Ophelia. But that didn't matter. The princess had no intention of getting too close to him anyway. Meanwhile, the host asked what had brought such an important person to his estate at such a late hour on such an important visit. Ophelia felt awkward because she had come to him without an invitation or an offer to meet. The young man looked at her slyly and thought about something. So it was better to dispel his hopes from the very beginning. Ophelia said that she had important business with Lord Eckhard, but not with Irestan, but with his older brother, Asad. Everyone around talked about his outstanding fighting skills and masterful fencing. The girl asked him to become a fencing tutor for the young prince, who was just beginning to learn this art. The young man did not know what to say. For him, it was truly a great honor and responsibility. Kirsten was upset that he had been passed over. He pushed the lady out of the training hall and said that it was actually very dangerous there because there were many cold weapons sharpened to perfection. Ophelia said that she knew a lot about danger. Recently, she had encountered a bandit on the street. The girl tried to pick up a small sword from the floor. The boys looked at her in awe. Kirsten decided to help. He magically lifted the sword into the air. The young man assured them that sometimes magic was much more reliable than simply knowing how to swing a sword. But his brother paid no attention to his words. Ophelia said that her visit was over. She had gotten everything she wanted from today's meeting, so she was looking forward to seeing her fencing instructor next week. The student himself was interested and motivated. Keir did not want his guest to leave his estate so quickly, so he asked if she had anything else to discuss with him. But she suddenly asked if he would like to become a teacher of general subjects for the future prince. This was very flattering for a young man who was eager to break into the circles of power. So Kirsat immediately agreed to the offer. But the girl said she had one more urgent matter to attend to. Ophelia was holding a flower in her hands. The princess asked if the magician could bring the plant back to life. Was there any hope of preserving the magic of renewal in it for the sake of continuing such beauty and delight? The young man noticed that it was a simple lavender. The girl agreed that the flower was very simple and ordinary, but it was very dear to her. The sorcerer noticed that she said this with a certain sadness and, for some reason, with grief. When Kirsten used his magic, warmth emanated from his hand. The flower in his hands came to life and filled with new, life-giving juices. Positive memories flooded the girl. She herself did not expect such a thing. Meanwhile, the young man asked if he could express his opinion on a certain matter. The girl tensed up, but the wizard assured her that he believed one should not wield such a dangerous thing lightly. Ophelia asked him not to send her any more gifts. They would do her no good, except perhaps make her even more reluctant to meet the princess in person. His actions were having the opposite effect. The young man knelt before the princess. He held a small short sword in his hands. He added that the girl was worth much more. But this flower was his precious gift, because he understood its importance. But Ophelia said that her only request was not to draw unnecessary attention to the imperial palace. She wanted nothing more than for the sorcerer to become a good teacher for Prince Utah. Since that meeting, Kirsten had been quiet, but for some reason, instead of feeling relieved, the girl felt uneasy. She couldn't understand whether the Lord had given up on his plan or was planning something even more grandiose. But now she had a more important question to answer. A meeting of the dukes, the aristocracy, was taking place. Everyone was watching the princess closely as she displayed her political acumen and maneuverability before these rulers. Duke Sarkart asked ironically if the girl had enjoyed the reception and the fair. If she was satisfied, then they could move on to less important state affairs that should not distract from the reign. This man was allowed a lot, as he was the princess's uncle on her mother's side, so she ignored his question. She was more interested in what was on the agenda of the Imperial Council this time. The indignant aristocrats began to talk about a group of doctors who had recently visited the poorest areas of the city, where they cut open the bodies of living people, did something to them, sewed them up, and said it was treatment. Ophelia agreed that there should be more doctors like that, if they really helped and healed people. Immediately, a clergyman spoke out against her, saying that this could not be allowed to happen against God's will. At that moment, the boys were playing hide and seek in the garden. It was difficult for the maid to keep track of them all. Nayu was distinguished by his decency and honesty, which could not be said about the prince, who enjoyed his freedom. The prince was a smart boy, but he did not like to study very much. Together with Nayu, he mastered the basic disciplines under the guidance of his sister's friend, Lord Kirsten. The boy did not like him because of his sister's tears. And although he tried in every way to attract the boy's attention to their studies, Utah's personal dislike prevented him from establishing full contact. The boy could only open up to his fencing mentor. The boy asked Assad if a magician could use magic to subdue a girl's mind. He replied that Kirsten was his younger brother, and he was not going to discuss him with their mutual student. The boy realized that he should ask his sister about it himself. Perhaps he was someone very special to her, but he remembered her reaction during their first meeting at dinner when she dropped her cutlery. These thoughts wouldn't leave the boy alone. On top of that, he thought that Nay could become his stepbrother, and there could be competition between them in the future. That's how Shani found him. She asked if the student leaving the middle of the lesson meant he wasn't going to have lunch with the princess at her part of the estate. UT had forgotten that they were supposed to have lunch together today. He felt awkward. The boy thought that he had relaxed too soon. One could expect a lot from Ophelia, but when he saw the flowers he had given her personally, he immediately relaxed. He felt pleased. The maid seemed to read his thoughts, and added that the princess had personally asked Lord Kirsten to use his magic to bring back to life the flowers that were very important and dear to her. Duke Sarkart asked for an audience with his niece, but she was forced to refuse because Yuti was waiting for her. The man did not understand the reasons for such attachment to this boy, whom she had previously kept in a tower. The girl did not want to talk to him. She thought she needed to come up with an excuse for him as soon as possible. But the man would not leave his niece alone. He clearly wanted something. Ute was waiting for his sister. He remembered her words about always having lunch or breakfast together. However, this time they brought Naya to him, explaining that Ophelia had suddenly become busy and had to leave. The young people sat at the table. The atmosphere was tense. However, their conversation was supposed to bring them closer together. Naya did not feel any hostility or aggression toward the prince, but something prevented them from speaking openly, as friends would. So Assad took the girl away from her annoying uncle. This aroused the latter's suspicions. However, the couple headed for the Temple of Honor. Ophelia did not fully understand the reason for the visit. Everyone who saw them leaving the palace said that the young man had no concept of political honor. Therefore, he could bring trouble upon the princess and his own family and anger the aristocrats. Meanwhile, the young man said that he actually felt very guilty towards her. He added that, apart from his brother, he had no relatives, and he had not been taught the rules of etiquette, as he had been taught fencing and fighting since childhood. Ophelia was ready to forgive him if he took back his coat. The young man did not immediately understand what she meant. He said that she could keep the coat. The princess thought he was just joking with her. The prince's teacher asked why the girl was so upset. She did not understand how he could see that, but Assad said that everything would be fine now. The high priest was waiting for them in the temple. The reasons for the meeting were strange. The high priest asked if she really intended to forgive the doctors for interfering in a matter that should be entirely controlled by the church and depend on the goodwill of God in heaven and his holy gifts. The girl thought this was to be expected, but the old man insisted that she personally announce the ban on their activities and begin the persecution of those who continue to practice interference in the human body for the purpose of healing. Ophelia did not know what to do. After all, the priest was on the side of the aristocracy, and she fully supported him. So going against him meant turning everyone against her, and Yuti would quickly deal with her. The protection of her faithful guard allowed her to refuse the aristocracy, which she immediately took advantage of. The girl announced that she fully supported the activities of the doctors. The priest was surprised. He remained calm, only reminding her that such a decision would provoke opposition from the aristocracy and many loyal vassals. Still, he was curious about the reason for her radical refusal and the great risk involved. Ophelia replied that she was not obliged to explain the reasons for her decisions. Nevertheless, she would follow the path she believed to be necessary and right for herself. People needed treatment. The priest said that she was a very kind and wise ruler. Assad added that they had been right not to doubt her. The bearded man added that the girl was doing everything right. She also cared about people's lives. Assad explained that he and the high priest agreed with her position on the doctors. The story about Naya also spread throughout society and aroused admiration among ordinary people. The majority of people sympathized with her. But the girl replied that one good deed did not make her a good and kind person. Besides, the motives behind her actions were not noble at all. Everyone around her was exaggerating. Apart from anxiety, she felt nothing. The company of the priest and Assad seemed even worse to her than the conversation with her uncle. Assad, meanwhile, said that he considered Naya to be very kind and honest. There was no need to emphasize that this child was too young and too naive for that. Ophelia added that few people in her country would have the courage to admit that they were terrible people. The tea she was offered seemed strange to the girl for some reason. It was too relaxing, and at the same time provoked her to recall her most secret emotions. Now she remembered the day when she cried loudly. This only led to Ophelia trying to gather her strength and lock her memories away in a high, cramped tower, never to let them out under any circumstances. The girl felt ashamed of herself. Ophelia felt very ashamed in front of UT, who, because of her stupidity and pride, had to suffer so much in the tower, spending almost a year of his life there, a year he could have used to good effect. The girl understood that such thoughts could calm her and give her spiritual salvation before the death she was preparing for. A visit to the temple seemed necessary and timely to her, as never before. Ophelia did not notice when she fell asleep on the sofa. She was awakened by Assad. He insisted that it was time to return to the palace, as many would begin to worry and fret over her absence. She agreed. Meanwhile, a young man named Isaac Belchereven got into a conflict with the guards of one of the powerful dukes of the empire. The boy was of humble origins, but he dared to strike the face of a descendant of an aristocratic family. Assad and his mistress were walking down the street, and the situation with Isaac remained behind them. Neither of them paid any attention to the unfortunate young man, who was promised to be beaten up or otherwise dealt with. The girl was returning home, realizing that she was very tired, as it had been a difficult day. But despite everything, she wanted to meet the boys, who seemed to have established good relations with each other. Suddenly, UT, angry and dark as a cloud, passed in front of her. He did not even glance at his sister, who had been looking for him for a long time. The boy suspected that Ophelia had not been at the meeting, but simply did not want to spend time with him. Both appreciated this gesture. Although the princess had had a difficult day, she found time to spend it with the boys. Ophelia realized that she needed to calm UT down first. But the boy was not in a peaceful mood. He said he had to finish his homework and left his sister and Naya. The boy felt uncomfortable around this girl. He had never been alone with her before. The boy explained that the prince was in a bad mood not because of her, or rather, partly because of her. He was torn apart by jealousy of Naya, whom he considered his stepbrother and a rival for his sister's love. Naya impressed the girl with his perceptiveness and ability to understand people. The girl was surprised to hear such mature things from him, but she remembered in time the conditions in which this child had to survive. Nayu added that he thought it was necessary for the girl to talk to her brother. After all, that might not be the only reason for his bad mood, but Ophelia would have to figure that out for herself as they talked. She walked down the garden path. She didn't feel like going to talk to her younger brother right now, but her future might depend on it. Ophelia was partly tired of humiliating herself in front of him, but she understood her guilt. Kirsten approached her. He informed her that the meeting that had been interrupted would continue after lunch. The dukes were going to decide on a very important matter, and there was no escaping it. Her uncle had organized everything. Ophelia asked why the magician was here now instead of teaching her brother. He replied that he had cancelled today's lesson at the prince's request. The prince wanted to do physical training and fencing. Today, Assad would be completely occupied with Kut. Suddenly, the young man produced a large bouquet of flowers from nowhere. The girl was angry. After all, she had asked him last time not to give her anything and not to draw attention to their relationship. The moment came when Ophelia decided to inquire about the real reasons for Lord Kirsten's arrival at the estate. After all, he constantly complains about her coldness and callousness, but does not try to leave. The young man asked her to come closer to him. He looked at her intently and said that he was ready to tell her everything. The girl was afraid to come closer because she began to suspect something in his words and actions. Lord Kirsten leaned over her and tried to kiss her. The girl was confused, but he reassured her because he could not do such a thing to a princess. Instead, Kirsten explained that he had been looking for Ophelia for a long time, but he did not have time to finish. He felt ill and fell to his knees in front of the girl. He could not speak, but reassured the frightened girl that everything was fine. After that, he said that he had to use his ability to move. Ophelia was left alone. It was the first time she had seen Lord Kirsten in such pain. He couldn't even speak because of the desperate pain. What could have happened to such a powerful wizard? But soon her thoughts turned to Utah. The novel said that his childhood was filled with pain and suffering. Every day was like the one before, and they were all similar to each other. Even if the boy was really jealous of her and someone else, she shouldn't open her heart to him, so as not to hurt him in the first place. It was difficult, but sometimes choices required sacrifice. The little boy began to call for his mother in his sleep. Ophelia didn't know what to do. Tears welled up in Utah's eyes. The boy slept and cried. He was in pain, but the girl couldn't help him at this stage. In the morning, he decided to go for a walk. The weather was wonderful, and there was still time before school. He felt very good. It seemed that the pain in his chest had disappeared and would no longer bother him. Life was taking on new colors. In the garden, the boy came across his sister, who had fallen asleep on the sofa. She was very beautiful, and her brother even stopped for a moment to enjoy her beauty. But suddenly, it seemed to him that she had stopped breathing. He approached her, trying not to wake her, but to check if she was all right. Ophelia's face also seemed too pale and almost cold, resembling a mask rather than a living person. But the girl heard someone approaching her and jumped up abruptly. She didn't understand how she had fallen asleep. The boy explained that he was very scared for her and just wanted to check if she was okay. Ophelia asked if he wanted to talk about something or ask a few questions. The girl didn't insist, but he might feel better if he told her what was troubling him. After all, sisters and friends are there for each other. The girl continued to talk about how everyone has to experience feelings of despair and jealousy. That is how people rise above themselves and prepare for adult life. Ophelia would not be able to protect him forever. Her sister added that he was actually the person closest to her, UT. There should be no secrets or misunderstandings between them. He would take the throne, and Ophelia would help him. But after that, a lot would change. And no matter what happened between them in the future, he would always be her younger brother. Now the conversation was over, because class was about to start in a few minutes. The boy thanked the girl. Something had changed in him. He hadn't expected her to call him her younger brother. It made him feel warm inside. It was the first time anyone had called him something nice, and she seemed to like him. Shani wasn't one of those people. Kirsten talked about how history is full of examples of entire families living in the empire who were united not by love and peace, but by years of enmity and hostility towards each other. Therefore, the mentor urged them not to trust what they saw at first glance. Not everything we see is true. Nothing in the world was clear-cut or settled. Yuti's thoughts returned to his sister and their conversation. Kirsten announced that the lesson would continue after the break. The boys decided that they needed to fortify themselves with sweets. After all, they had a whole day of academic subjects and theoretical training ahead of them. The students enjoyed the sweets. Nayu was very grateful to the princess for her kindness. The Lord added that Ophelia's reign was marked by prosperity and care for the common people and their well-being. The country was thriving. Nayu asked why, in that case, the girl was behaving as if she would soon cease to exist in this world. Ut paid attention to the words of his godbrother. He remembered his sister's gaze and facial expression lately. Ut asked his mentor if he knew of a good friend of the princess whom she could trust and open up to. Kirsten did not expect such a question from a little boy, so he was silent for a long time. The boy thought his mentor's eyes had changed. They attributed it to the sun. The young man said that Ophelia's good friend was Isaac Beckenwell. For some reason, a note of hostility slipped into the words of the sorcerer and the prince's teacher. Meanwhile, Isaac put on a doctor's costume that looked terrifying at first glance. The priest tried to stop him, but the young man was serious. He wanted to help and save people from death. From that day on, he was ready to leave his post and become a doctor instead of a holy man, who was allowed to do more than just pray and give communion so that people could come back to life and continue to live peaceful lives. The high priest calmed down and offered to talk. He asked the young man how he planned to earn a living. He replied that he would become a doctor. He had no doubt about his abilities in medicine. The man did not try to continue the conversation. After all, he did not want to provoke a conflict and quarrel before his son left the temple. Even if he refused now, he would do so later. He also wanted to meet the princess, who had unequivocally defended the doctors, even after realizing the terrible consequences of such a decision for herself and for the entire state in particular. The priest ordered him to go immediately and establish a relationship with such a pious person, who was ready to make great sacrifices for the sake of the common people. Isaac decided to listen to his father this time. But only his father knew that Isaac had a tremendous amount of divine power. In time, he could become a very powerful mentor of the temple, or even a high priest. But the young man chose what he believed to be the right path for himself. Keir was checking his homework and was not entirely satisfied with the results. He asked if his student had correctly understood the phrase about seeing things that are not real. The boy replied that he did not think so. The mentor asked if the boy did not see a clear connection between his mother's death and the rumors about Princess Ophelia. The boy refused to talk about it. The teacher seemed to be trying to lead the boy to the right conclusion. Nayu listened to the conversation but pretended to be reading a book intently. Meanwhile, Kirsten reminded him that upon careful consideration, one could come to the opposite conclusion and draw completely different conclusions about this matter. Nayu was afraid that a psychological struggle would arise between the magician and his brother. This could not be allowed to happen. But why couldn't they do this somewhere else? There were many opportunities for that. Life in the Emperor's palace turned out to be much harder for the boy than he had hoped. The prince did not always want to talk to him as an equal, but if you tried hard enough, you could get him to talk. The boy also missed his real older brother, who had to work very hard to feed Naya, because he had been orphaned at a very early age and was not yet able to support himself. Next to him was the princess's personal bodyguard, whose name was Philip. He looked closely at the boy and then advised him to check his pockets. Perhaps he would find something interesting or useful right now. He found chocolate in his pants pocket. The boy remembered that he had never put it there, but his thoughts returned to the tension in the house. It seemed that Lord Kirsten had brought something negative to the palace. The tutor was very determined, but the princess did not like it. However, his insistence could only make the situation worse over time. Ophelia was determined to rebuff him and not try to do anything with him. The appearance of Lord Kirsten himself interrupted the little boy's enjoyment of the chocolate. Not only did Naya dislike the man, but he also aroused some animosity in her because of his unpleasant expression in any situation. The young man, meanwhile, pointed out that it seemed as if the boy was only learning what he would need in life. He agreed, because after leaving the palace, he would only have to worry about counting his food. The boy began to run away. He got lost among the corridors and garden plantings. It so happened that he ran into a girl, and they fell to the ground together. Ophelia asked him to explain what was happening. The boy said that he had the impression that Lord Kirsten was possessed by an evil spirit. He had heard many times that the eyes are the mirror of the soul, and this gentleman's eyes changed very often. It was as if the devil himself lived there. It was necessary to find a representative of God on earth, a priest who could drive the evil out of this house and chase away the possessed mentor, so that he would not try to tempt anyone or incite them to foolish deeds. Suddenly, the boy realized that he had allowed himself such thoughts in the presence of the princess. He felt embarrassed and asked her to forgive him, but the girl was curious about him. She was impressed by the depth of Nayu's thoughts. Ophelia asked if he was really only 9 years old. After all, he didn't even approach his studies like a normal child. The boy chose what he needed and knew how to separate truth from manipulation. Meanwhile, a priest entered the gates of the estate. He was being checked by the guards, and the boy informed them that he had come at the invitation of the princess herself, and that he would soon be changing his profession to that of a healer. Ophelia rose from her seat and informed the boy of the arrival of Father Aloysius. He would be able to shed light on the situation with Lord Kirsten. Exorcising demons was a priest's specialty. Nayu felt better when he saw the smile on the princess's face. He hadn't seen her so carefree and happy in a long time. The girl was beaming because her affairs were beginning to fall into place.